Hello, my name is Wilf Butcher. I'm Chief Executive of the Association for Specialist Fire Protection, and today I'm going to take you through a presentation in relation to passive fire protection, where to go for essential information, and also to look at some of the regulatory issues that relate to passive fire protection. I've been invited here to talk to you about passive fire protection. Primarily, where do you go if you want to get information, and what kind of information is available out there to you? And actually, it's quite a lot. A little bit of history, first of all, though, very short. The association was formed back in 1975 as the Association for Structural Fire Protection Contractors and Manufacturers, which is a real gobful. Essentially, in those days, we had a situation, it was realised, where we had a few manufacturers, an awful lot of bespoke contractors, or white van man, if you like, and the quality and standards of work in our sector was interesting, to say the least. We did, however, need to get together with the certification bodies and look at how we could put some serious professionalism into the industry. And I think it's fair to say by the time we got to 1996, we were in a situation where we weren't just dealing with structural fire protection anymore. We were dealing with the whole of the passive sector. So compartmentation, ducts and dampers, reaction to fire systems, the whole gambit in effect. And I think it is fair to say now, if you look over the years, that the association is responsible for or has engagement in just about all of the regulation that you're likely to come across in relation to passive fire protection. That book there, incidentally, this is just about the only hard copy left known to man, you can download this from the website, is the best practice guide. It's one of the most downloaded documents that we have. However, in about 2 months' time, there will be a major revision of this document, and it is actually targeted at you. It is about the entire design process, taking you through from concept right the way through to how a main contractor should conduct himself, onwardly to how the building should be maintained for its whole life. So it is a very valuable document. As I say, you can have a look at it on site now because it's not going to cost you anything, but certainly the revised one will be more important. We have pretty much all of the key contractors that you would expect to find in this industry, but just as important, we have all of the certification bodies as well. And I really think that's important as far as you're concerned, because you know that in terms of how we as an industry operate now, we are very joined up compared with how we may have been a few years ago. It is also important to understand that all of our membership contractors are third-party certificated. I'm going to talk a little bit about third-party certification for you now, because I think this is something that is absolutely essential when you're specifying to ensure that the people that you're employing downstream to carry out the fire protection work are actually competent to do so. So what does this mean? It does mean that if you're not familiar with third-party certification, it means that the company concerned is independently audited by an accredited body, accredited by UCAS, to actually inspect. Accredited certificates of conformity are issued by the installer. And I was at a seminar recently, and one of the questions that was asked was, surely there is a piece of paper that I can be given at the end that says formally that this work has been carried out correctly? And the answer in that audience was, probably not. And I stood up and said, well, if that is the case, then whoever did that work is not a third-party certificated installer, because they would, as a matter of course, be giving a certificate of conformity to say that work has been done correctly. That's essential to you as designers, because that means should something go seriously wrong down the road and you find yourself in court justifying why you built the building the way you did, you can actually say, I employed or the process employed a third-party certificated installer, and I use third-party certificated products as well. So it's a good protection mechanism for yourselves, and it's common sense. But it's also that they will give essential evidence to support the regulatory reform fire safety order. I'll mention that a bit in a minute. And essential documentation in relation to Regulation 38, which I will again mention in a minute. We do have a facility now for people like yourselves to be members of the association. This is a little commercial plug, which does get you deeper into our website in terms of information. But whether you do or you don't, there's a lot of information that's free to download for you anyway. So this is where you go, asfp.org.uk. There's a huge amount of information there that you'll pick up in terms of guidance notices. I particularly draw your attention to understanding the term competent person, and indicative and ad hoc testing is another interesting read that I think you should benefit from. But we're perhaps best known for what we call our coloured books. These are classified into the generic groups, and today we're really talking about this one here, the yellow book, which is the oldest of the books. If you've not ever used this book, it's a comprehensive technical guidance document which takes you through the entire engineering process and the use of passive fire protection. But it also has in there just about every manufacturer that is of relevance for you to look at in a non-commercial way. The whole process is completely technical, so you can actually compare one product system with another. As I say, it's broken into 2 volumes. What I will say is the fifth, says here the 4th edition. The 5th edition is near completion. That will be ready, I hope, before the autumn. And it is a fundamental update. It's a bit like iOS 7 for iPhones is going to be evidently a complete makeover. Well, think of this in the same way. It's a complete reappraisal of how this document works. So keep an eye on the website for information as to when it becomes available, and you can download it free. So we've coloured colour books and advisory notices, but also technical guidance documents. John mentioned one of them a moment ago. In fact, we've got 2 new ones coming out this July, I hope. One is on the installation and inspection of fire stopping, compartmentation in other words, which is of direct relevance to yourselves. And the second one is installation and inspection of fire resisting duct systems. So these are important codes of practice, and you certainly should have them on your desk. There's obviously a lot of other published data that you can find on the site, technical editorial, which is often peer-reviewed, so you're welcome to have a look at that as well. If we don't have it, we can direct you to it, essentially. So, you know, if you're looking for something we don't have the answer, you're almost certain that we'll direct you somewhere else. And we do have a technical officer, Niall Rowan, who is on hand at the end of a telephone. He hates me saying that, preferably on the end of email, who can, and he can address some of your problems. If he can't, he'll send you wherever somebody can. I want to just very briefly to pick up on 4 of the issues that I just mentioned, starting with Regulation 38, or previously known as Regulation 16B. This is probably the most closely guarded Document B regulation secret, I think, known to man. Regulation 38 requires that where a building work involves the erection or extension of a relevant building, fire safety information should be given to the responsible person at the completion of the project and when the building or extension is first occupied. In other words, the design information that you produce and the work that the main contractor does should be handed over to the responsible person, because there is no fire certificate anymore, as you well know. And that person takes that information and is able then to conduct his fire risk assessment. If he doesn't have that information, then he can't do a full fire risk assessment. So you are actually technically, this is a regulation, you are required to do this. Now you may say, well, I do this anyway, but I didn't know there was a regulation. But in effect, this came about specifically to ensure that that information is passed on to the competent or the responsible person. Now the interesting thing is, when you look at the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, it's an English exercise because when it comes to regulation, the UK hasn't been a United Kingdom for, well, decades. So essentially, you're working in this block here. Last week, we were doing this exercise in Scotland, and Regulation 38 is not in their regulations, but it's on its way. And in other areas, it's not. Ireland's putting its own version in. But certainly here, as far as you're concerned in England, Regulation 38 is relevant. In terms of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, who is the responsible person, very briefly? Well, it's the employer of the building now, the managing agent, charity, or it's the contractor who has a degree of control on the premises. So, in other words, when a building is being built, the main contractor is the responsible person in relation to the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. So all aspects of that are applicable to them as individuals in law. What is it about? The Act states that fire risk in a premises must be managed for the life of the building. Fire authorities no longer issue certificates, and those previously in force are not valid, essentially. And the person must carry out a fire risk assessment. Hence, the building regulations introduced Regulation 38 in 2006, specifically to tie in with this. It goes on where expertise to carry out such risk assessments is lacking. This process must be passed to someone who can be deemed as suitable and sufficient. That's a wonderful expression, isn't it? Suitable and sufficient. What does that mean? Nonetheless, the responsible person will be responsible in law. I think this is a common misunderstanding. If somebody employs a fire risk assessor and they do a risk assessment of their building, it's their responsibility. Actually, yes, it is, but you who have employed them, the owner of the building, is the person ultimately responsible in court in law. The responsible person, either on their own or with others, must, as far as reasonably practical, another wonderful sentence, make sure that everyone in the premises or nearby can escape safely. So in other words, if you're in a multi-complex of buildings, a Currys and a B&Q all sitting together, then there are multiple responsible persons in effect. If you want to find out more about the role of risk assessment, that's the book to download or buy as a hard copy version. It takes you through, walks you through a fire risk assessment essentially, and we now have videos that support it and an app that we have now as well, which will take you through this process. And we've distilled that document to bring it down to that, so it's quite a useful and valid document. Third-party certification. I mentioned this earlier. You've heard my view, but in essence, if you look at Essential Principle document, it will tell you that Principle 10, as a minimum, all fire protection products shall be third-party certificated. It's as blunt as that as a recommendation. And then when you look at the building regulations, provides a means of ensuring that installations have been conducted by knowledgeable contractors to an appropriate standard, thereby increasing reliability of anticipated performance in fire. I often hear the argument, yes, but it costs more. Sorry, that's complete rubbish. It doesn't cost any more to use a third-party certificated installer. There are so many of them out there, and we're in a recessionary period where competition counts. The difference is it's going to cost you more if a building control find that what's been done is incomplete or inefficient. In terms of fire risk assessment, there is no qualification to be a fire risk assessor. Anyone in this room, you, me, we could all become fire risk assessors if we wanted to. And that's the problem. Responsible persons don't necessarily understand. The cheapest recently that I saw was a fire risk assessment for £25 online. I thought that was the cheapest, but then I discovered a rodent inspection company was offering a free fire risk assessment with every rodent inspection. Now, that's how trivial some people consider fire protection to be, I'm afraid. I know that it doesn't apply to the audience that we've got here, but certainly that is the issue. So competency, define competency. Here you've got 4 surgeons. Now, each one of those guys will have spent 7 to 10 years to get where they are. They're highly competent. So when you're talking to your main contractor and you've suggested a certain path, but your main contractor says, but these guys can do this and they can do it cheaper and they have the experience, can you answer that question? The question is, who do you want to carry out your triple heart bypass? And if you say the plastic surgeon, I'm really concerned for you. But the point is, they're all highly professional people in their own competencies. Take them out of their competency and it's a different scenario. So that's really the message from me. Construction Products Directive now become the Construction Products Regulation. It's actually 1st of July, which means that any product that effectively has a European product standard or a HEN or a European Assessment Document, an EAD, requires to be CE marked. It's not a national mark and it's not a quality mark, but a lot of confusion is going to come out of CE marking. Virtually all passive fire protection products at the moment are not mandated to CE mark. It's voluntary. So there is going to be confusion. It's trading standards that are responsible for looking after this exercise. So be aware, there are documents that you can go onto our site to understand construction products regulation. And we'll direct you to other sites that you can go to read other documentation, but you do need to get up to speed on it. So to sum up, I think hopefully I've convinced you that there is some merit in third-party certificated products and third-party certificated installation. And the I place the order, it's not my responsibility, doesn't wash in a court of law. So be mindful of that fact. And as I've often said, there's nothing wrong with thinking outside the box. We don't think everything should be prescriptive by any means. Fire engineering is an essential tool. And that actually says there, please remove this wedge from the bottom of the door in the event of fire, which is fine. Just remember though, you must understand the consequences if you get it wrong. People often assume when I show this video that that's a timber frame building. It's not, it's structural steel. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.